Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Roberts. I'm currently the coordinator for the African Navy's Research Network and an instructor in political science here at the University of Calgary here in Alberta, Western Canada. I'd also mention that I'm an honorary Akokite for anybody who's from Nigeria, given considerable time I've spent at Unilag during my PhD research some years ago. We're very excited to welcome you to the inaugural edition of our African Seapower Webinar series. As moderator, and given the subject of today's panel, please let me invoke all protocols observed. This webinar will be recorded and available at our website at africannavies.net in the very near future. Before I introduce our speakers, let me briefly explain why a research network about African navies and this related seminar series is being coordinated by a small group at the University of Calgary, a university 1,000 kilometers away by road from the nearest coastline and over 9,000 kilometers away from Dakar, West Africa. Over the last few decades, the University of Calgary has developed two relevant strengths. First, in African studies within and across various disciplines, and second, in security and strategic studies, including military history. Our working group that launched the globally growing African Navy's Research Network reflects those strong interdisciplinary foundations. And for those of you who haven't joined our network formally yet, please visit our website and send us an email. Those strong foundations have also led to institutional support from the University of Calgary and specific funding from the Calgary Institute for the Humanities, as well as the Canadian Department of National Defence Mines Program, a competitive program for funding scholarly and policy research in strategic and defense studies. We thank CIH and Mines for their ongoing support. We've leveraged these international contacts and networks to bring together scholars, mostly, but not solely, historians and political scientists, naval and maritime experts, practitioners, including serving naval officers, with a keen interest in the least studied military institution on the African continent. We are currently working on an edited book. We're planning future webinars and urging members of the network to work together to invigorate policy debates and academic research with contributions and appropriate outlets. We'll also be adding content to our website over 2022, including trying to identify important research generated in professional military education institutions across Africa and elsewhere that might not otherwise find a public audience. So that said, let's turn to our first African Seapower webinar topic, the Nigerian Navy. This is, of course, one of the big four navies on the continent, alongside Egypt, Algeria, and South Africa, and one recently experiencing considerable recapitalization. While it is impossible to cover, of course, every aspect of the history of development of any navy within a short panel, we've asked our experts to highlight important historical developments and recent milestones to help us understand the current orientation and capabilities of the Nigerian Navy. So let me briefly introduce our esteemed panel before I turn things over to them. Dr. Tim Stapleton, a colleague of mine here at the University of Calgary, he's in the history department, will highlight aspects of his research on the colonial era foundations of West African navies, looking back at how sea power was conceived by colonial authorities since the late 19th century through to Nigerian political elites during the independence era. Dr. Lawrence Udeagbala is a lecturer in history and war studies at the Nigerian Defense Academy, Kaduna. He'll highlight some of his research that examines the Nigerian Navy's role and development during the Civil War, 1967 to 1970. Dr. Zara Kwaghe is an associate professor in history and international studies at the Federal University of Lafia, Nasarawa State, Nigeria. She will provide context to the main operational challenge facing the Nigerian Navy in the 21st century, the waxing and waning insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea. And Dr. Dirk Seibels, senior analyst at Risk Intelligence based in Denmark, will walk us through the emerging and often complex phenomena of close cooperation between the Nigerian Navy and private security companies in the Gulf of Guinea. I'll now turn it over to our first speaker, Tim Stapleton, and I've asked each of our speakers to keep their initial remarks to 10 to 12 minutes, but after their presentations, we will of course take questions and comments from our audience, so please use the Q&A button to ask us questions or comments that we will be able to continue the discussion after our initial presentations. So Tim, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, and it's nice to see everybody here, so welcome. So I've written a paper on the origins of the Nigerian and Ghana navies. It's kind of a deep dive into the origins of them, so this is going to be a very, very simplified version of what that paper says. The paper is, well, I'll also just stick to the Nigeria part of the paper today because that's our theme for the panel and because of time, really. So the paper is based on a lot of primary sources. There's a ton of archival files on the origins of these navies in the 50s at the National Archives, UK in Kew. There's also some material in Nigerian and Ghanaian archives. The Ghanaians seem to have more than the Nigerians, but nothing compared to the amount that's at Kew. So in looking at the origins of these navies, I was struck by the fact that a lot of things written about them over the past 20 years, about their current capabilities, describe a problem, a current problem or a recent problem, that those navies have a sort of mismatch of capabilities and needs, that their capabilities are basically mostly around what you could see as conventional naval warfare, kind of ship-to-ship combat in terms of the vessels they have, the training, and so on. Yet those navies are increasingly called upon to perform essentially maritime law enforcement duties, which takes them into coastal waters, riverine areas, where, according to a lot of literature, they don't have as much capability, basically. So the question I wanted to answer is, why is this the case, right? Why did these navies develop in this way when, in fact, their needs, you know, became different? And of course, you could answer the question very simply and say, well, you know, having navies with big ships and so on, it's part of the trappings of a modern state. At independence, the new governments wanted to have naval vessels as symbols, and I'll get into that in a bit. That is just like building, you know, new capital cities or government buildings, or having, you know, big expensive government cars and so on. And I think all that's true. But as an historian, I wanted to get into the details of how this developed over time as a kind of expectation of what West African navies, the Nigerian Navy, the Ghanaian Navy should be. And really, I found that this didn't develop overnight in the decolonization era, though the decolonization era is very important. You can trace this back to the 1930s, basically. Just to kind of sum up the main point of the paper is that this expectation for kind of conventional navy in Nigeria and in Ghana, it really emerged in the 1930s. It developed during World War II because of British naval interests. And it accelerated during the decolonization era because of continued British interests and influence in the region, but also because of the kind of expectations, the desires of the new decolonization era West African political leaders to create a national institution, to create a navy as a national symbol, essentially. So let me kind of tease that out a bit in the remaining few minutes. So when I first started doing research on this, I thought, okay, let me go back to the earliest Nigerian Navy, which is actually one of the earliest West African navies. And it was called the Nigeria Marine. And it really started in the Niger Coast Protectorate, which is sort of the southeastern riverine part of Nigeria today, during the conquest era of the 1890s and early 1900s. Now, I'm not saying pre-colonial societies didn't have naval capabilities. They did. But this British-led Nigerian Marine seemed to be the first kind of modern Western-style Navy created in Nigeria. And at that time in the 1890s, it was a mechanism for colonial conquest. So I'm not saying it's great, but I'm saying it was, you know, important. And what struck me about the design, the capabilities of this Nigerian Marine was that it was very well suited to inland waterway, brown water, riverine environment. It had a lot of shallow draft vessels. They had regular patrol routes in the areas, waterways and rivers. They were engaged in, unfortunately, wars of conquest in the area. So they had to be looking at that environment, essentially. And what they were doing was imposing a colonial state on that environment. Now, it wasn't all just military campaigns and so on, although they did a lot of that. They also were involved in clearing the waterways to make them navigable for larger vessels, setting up buoys, creating maps and charts, even delivering mail, creating a rudimentary colonial communication system. So they were very kind of inland waterway focused, let's say. And I thought, well, gosh, what, you know, if that was the case in the early colonial period, why didn't independent Nigeria have a navy like that? Well, the answer is it changed. It didn't remain like that. As of the First World War, with the Nigerian Marines' involvement in landings in Cameroon, where they did their first mine-sweeping operations. And then after the First World War, really when the conquest era started to wane, the Nigerian Marine became something like a uniformed ports authority slash transport service, mail service. And it started to do a lot more operations along the coastal waters with passenger service between Calabar and Lagos in like the 1920s, that kind of thing. So then the next kind of big period I looked at here, and it's a really important one, I think, is the interwar period, especially the 1930s and then the World War II era. So in 1931, the British government passed the Colonial Naval Defense Act. And there's a really interesting historian who's written about that, Daniel Owen Spence. And he wrote a book about this with regard to East Africa and the Caribbean. He mentioned West Africa, but he didn't get into that a lot because, you know, he only had so much space. So I've kind of fleshed that out a bit. So what this Colonial Naval Defense Act was about was taking pressure off the Royal Navy by creating subsidiaries of the Royal Navy in the colonies. Now, some colonies already had navies, the bigger one. And of course, Nigeria had the Nigerian Marine, but this was about creating kind of partners for the Royal Navy in small colonies. And that's when you see the first naval volunteer forces in Gambia, Sierra Leone, and the Gold Coast, with the idea being that they would protect the ports, keep waterways open, I mean, keep the coastal waters open, the sort of regional waters open. They're very outward looking. They're meant to kind of keep the ports, you know, shipping out raw materials and so forth, especially in wartime, where West African raw materials became very important. And really to do that until the Royal Navy could get its act together and take over those duties. Now, this created a kind of administrative wrangle in Nigeria because Nigeria already had kind of a navy. And the imperial government wanted colonial Nigeria to turn the Nigerian Marine into a proper navy. And certainly the colonial administration in Nigeria kind of wanted that too, but administrative difficulties made it almost impossible in the interwar period for a number of reasons. One, a series of Nigerian governors didn't want to lose control of a Nigerian Marine, because if it became a subsidiary of the Royal Navy, then it could be taken away from Nigeria, theoretically. It could, and then the governors would not have people to run the ports and things like that. Also, the officers of a Nigerian Marine were not crazy about the conditions of service they were offered in this new dispensation, because many of them already had status as officers in the the Royal Naval Reserve, different kinds of reserve forces, basically, and they thought this would lower their status. And very importantly, the enlisted personnel of a Nigerian Marine were, by the 1930s, members of trade unions. And that would not be cool in terms of their enlistment in a proper Navy under naval discipline. So all these difficulties kind of combined together to mean that Nigeria in the interwar period did not develop a kind of subsidiary of the Royal Navy, which you do see in the Gold Coast and Sierra Leone and so on, even though those were very small. So World War II kind of forced the hand of a Nigeria colonial government, because the British government kept saying, you know, you have to create a Navy to defend Lagos and Port Harcourt and these important ports. So ultimately in 1941, the Nigerian Marine kind of morphed, or part of it morphed, into a Nigerian Naval Defense Force. So it was engaged in mine-sweeping duties in and around the ports, that kind of thing. Although it was mostly active during the earlier part of the war. Later, when U-boat threats passed and the Royal Navy became more active, it kind of took a back seat to the Royal Navy, which became more of a presence in places like Lagos. So then after the war, it's kind of interesting that the idea for these subsidiary naval forces kind of was resurrected, let's say. And there was an idea on the part of the imperial government to create a West African naval force, a kind of regional umbrella structure, kind of like the army version, the West African Frontier Force, which had existed for some time. So this West African Naval Force was just a theory. It was just an ambition. It was never created. And the idea, of course, was that the Nigerian Naval Defense Force would become part of that, along with all the other ones in Gambia, Sierra Leone, and Gold Coast. But it never happened because in 1949, there was an African Forces Conference, a kind of meeting of the British authorities around security forces. And because of the rising nationalist protest in the region in that period, and particularly important for them was the strike, the colliery strike at Enugu. They decided to shelve the idea of building up regional naval forces and focus on land forces, the army and the police, to suppress this rising protest. So that kind of put naval development plans for Nigeria and other places on hold again. So then the last period I'm looking at in the paper is the period of decolonization, basically the 50s. And that's where local politicians get involved in naval planning, especially in Nigeria, but other places too. From at least 1950, there are Nigerian politicians essentially demanding the creation of a Nigerian Navy as a symbol of the nation. And those calls only increased during the 1950s as the British devolved political power to Nigeria. It becomes a federation of 54, then you get self-governing regions in 56 and so forth. So given all those changes, that devolution of power, the British are also concerned that, hey, we need an ally in West Africa. And they're kind of interested in developing this, helping Nigeria develop this navy, so it will be an ally in terms of securing regional waters, not looking at the riverine areas, but actually looking at, you know, trade routes and international shipping and so forth. And particularly, they're thinking that there'll be a kind of repeat of World War II, right? So they kind of want the Nigerian Navy to be a strong regional ally in the area. They also want the Nigerian Navy to be a customer for British shipyards. And so it's going to be an ally and a customer. With Ghana, it's really just a customer. And of course, the British don't want other powers involved in what they consider their sphere of influence. So the British get really involved in encouraging the development of a Nigerian Navy, and they have a lot of willing partners in the Nigerian politicians of those days, especially the ones from the north, the NPC, and to some extent the ones from the East, the NCNC. There was one objecting voice to the creation of a Nigerian Navy in the 50s, and that was Obafemi Awolowo of the Action Group, the main party in the West. He thought this was just a complete waste of money, and that really there was no naval threat to Nigeria, so why not spend that money on national development and improving the lives of the people, essentially. But the Action Group didn't have enough power, and the government of the time that was coming into office really wanted a Navy and really wanted to stay close to the British, especially NPC, so they did it. So the way that the Nigerian Navy was essentially created, the modern one, was that in 1954, a civilian, essentially bureaucratic ports authority was created. And then the Nigerian Marine was folded into that. The Nigerian Marine became defunct, and the members had a year to decide if they wanted to stay in the new ports authority or go somewhere else. And the British and the local officials thought this is a great time to take the core of those Nigerian Marine people with their skills and put them into a Nigerian Navy, basically. And so that's what happened in 1956. Now, in terms of, I've got a lot in the paper about ship acquisitions and so on. I'll just make a kind of last point that I'll just talk about one of the ships that was acquired, the main one, which was the original HMNS Nigeria, which originally was the British Algerine minesweeper HMS Hare. So this was to be the flagship of a Nigerian Navy. So this was an Algerine minesweeper manufactured by the British in World War II. Some of them were made here in Canada, but this one was made in Britain. They were made with an old kind of design to facilitate mass production during the war. And of course, by the time Nigeria acquired this in 1959, it was a kind of old, pretty old vessel and with an even older design. So Britain gifted this minesweeper to Nigeria in order essentially to maintain interest in naval development in Nigeria. Some of the Nigerian Marine vessels had been taken over by the new Nigerian Navy, kind of painted gray, and they put guns on them, but they didn't look cool. So this Algerine class minesweeper looked like a warship. And that was the main point, that it looked the part. And it would encourage the government, it would encourage the public to support further warship acquisitions. And indeed, once that happened, Nigeria did order seaward defense boats from Britain, although they couldn't pay for all new ones. So they got one new one and the rest were kind of used. And I'm sure that'll come up in Dr. Lawrence's paper. But this original ship, the original HMNS Nigeria, was kind of like a piece of junk. So, it looked good, but when it got to Nigeria, it had a lot of mechanical problems, and essentially the boiler blew up. In 1960, it killed a sailor, injured a bunch of other sailors, and it had to be kind of towed back to the UK to just be sold for scrap. And actually this stimulated a bunch of critical comments in Nigerian newspapers. So it may have had the opposite effect of, dampening public excitement in it. So that's just a kind of antidote to and I've got a lot of this stuff in the paper, that this ship was acquired not for its capabilities, but for how it looked, essentially. The British wanted Nigeria to become a naval ally, and that also gets into the defense agreement between Nigeria and Britain on independence, which was very short-lived because public didn't like it. It was sort of seen as neocolonialism. But anyway, I'll kind of wrap it up there and just kind of restate my main point, that this expectation to build a Nigerian Navy that kind of looks like other navies in the world, didn't just happen on independence. It has a kind of long history. It's something that developed in a very specific way through very specific British influence and actions and policies. And a lot of Nigerian leaders, ultimately of the independence era, kind of bought into that because they wanted a navy that looked the part, that symbolized Nigeria's importance as a new nation in Africa. So that's very simplified. So I'll just wrap it up there and answer any questions later. Thanks.
Very much, Tim. We're going to jump right into Dr. Udeagbala's look at the Navy in the Nigerian Civil War. And of course, the Nigerian Navy, of course, had its role in the Civil War, but I think he's also going to touch on aspects of a Biafran Navy. So Lawrence, you weren't going to try and show all of your slides, were you? Because I do have them ready to go, but you tell me which slides that you wanted to use.
Okay, it's good to be here. I will tell you the one to share later.
Yeah, so he's currently trying to reconnect. So maybe what I don't want to really do it out of order, but Dr. Kwaghe's paper actually does cover elements of the development of the Navy and then gives us context about the Gulf of Guinea crisis. So Zara, are you okay to go ahead as we wait for Lawrence to reconnect? So yeah, please go ahead, and I can show your screen while you speak. I can show your PowerPoint.
Yes. Okay. Actually speaking on that, I want to thank you for inviting me and being part of this maiden edition of Nigerian Navy and the discussion that we are going to hold. I'm talking about Nigerian Navy and the challenges of insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea. Like Tim rightly pointed out, he's been able to look at the background to the creation of the Nigerian Navy, especially in the period of colonialism. But the Nigerian Navy as we have it today was actually established on April 1st, 1956 as Nigerian Naval Service. In 1958, in preparation for independence, Nigeria, the government passed an act that designated the naval service as the Royal Nigerian Navy. It was not only, it was in 1963 that Nigerian Navy, after Nigeria became a republic, that the Nigerian Navy came up and took up the name as the Nigerian Navy. And they had an act of parliament that passed the following rules for the Nigerian Navy. And those rules are the seaward defense of Nigeria, to coordinate this with sister service in aid to civil power, to enforce customs laws of Nigeria, general training of officers and men in naval duties, hydrographic survey duties, combating illegal oil exploration, illegal oil bunkering and trade, keeping away unauthorized fishing trawlers from the Nigerian water, and the use for illegal activities. These were activities that the Nigerian Navy was supposed to, roles they were supposed to play. Excuse me. Now, the Gulf of Guinea, we all know that is one of the places that the Nigerian Navy has been working very much to make sure that they keep the Gulf of Guinea safe. Where is the Gulf of Guinea? The Gulf of Guinea stretches from Senegal to Angola, covering about 6,000 kilometers of coastline. And the member countries of the region are Ghana, Togo, Benin, Nigeria, Cameroon, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Congo, Sao Tome and Principe, Congo DRC, and Angola, including Cabinda. The Gulf, we know that is very, both geopolitical and economic importance of the Gulf is very, very vile. The transport, that's the area where transport of goods from Central and Southern Africa takes place. So it is also a choke point for the African energy trade. is very, very important, and not only to Nigeria, but all countries and the regions, and even outside Nigeria that trade through the Gulf of the Guinea. Now, the maritime crime, you know that the Gulf of Guinea has this, because of the manner of trade that is going on, there is this maritime crime going on also in the Gulf of Guinea. And the maritime crime is characterized by piracy, sea robbery, illicit trafficking in persons, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, hostage taking, human and drug trafficking, oil bunkering, and insurgency. These are main crimes that occur in the Gulf of Guinea. And the Nigerian Navy is one of the navies that is responsible, mainly responsible in making sure that the Gulf of Guinea is safe for trade in the region. Now, you realize that Nigerian Navy need to tackle insecurity in Gulf of Guinea, embarked on anti-piracy operations. And the anti-piracy operation that they've embarked on has led to the rescue of some of the vessels that were attacked by pirates. And the examples of some of them that they've been able to rescue, pirates have been one of the problems in that area in the Gulf of Guinea, is attacked by pirates. And in May 2020, for example, that 9 pirate acts occurred, out of which only 2 were successful. The same thing in 2016 recorded the highest piracy attacks in the past 5 years, with 70 incidents, out of which 51 were successful, while 19 were unsuccessful. In 2017, we see the same thing. The same happened in 2019 and 2020. The Nigerian Navy also has in the past years destroyed more than 2,287 illegal refineries in its sites against crude oil theft and illegal bunkering. We see that happening all the time. They've been able to destroy some of the refineries that are illegal. And in 2018, 2019, we see that 2017, even in this 2020, 2021, 2022, the same thing happened. Anti-smuggling is one of the problems also they face in the Gulf. And the Nigerian Navy has arrested many of the smugglers. Some of them they've been able to arrest, some they were not able to arrest. But some of the arrests that have been made by the Nigerian Navy include the arrest of 449 suspected smugglers with the recovery of 82 smuggling boats and 22 vehicles, cumulatively laden with 61,719 bags of rice. Navy had 24 maritime domain awareness, that's MDA centers, located across the Nigerian coastline. And what is their duty? They help in carrying out round-the-clock surveillance of the nation's maritime space, using the regional and maritime awareness capability and the Falcon Eye facilities, in addition to the use of vessels and helicopters. So recently prosecuted piracy in the Gulf of Guinea was the first time that the Gulf, they were able to prosecute some of the pirates for the very first time in the continent. So in spite of all the achievements, the Nigerian Navy is still faced with challenges. Some of those challenges include the growing number of professional pirates, more violent attacks, with 80% now involving the use of firearms. And you know, the use of firearms is as a result of some of the insurgencies that we have experienced, not only in Nigeria, even within the Nigerian region. Increased, and it's only increased, it's all use firearms. Hostages hidden in the Niger Delta, taking of hostages. Insurgency is one of the problems that they are also facing. In Nigeria, we are all aware of the Boko Haram insurgency, not only the Boko Haram within Nigeria, even outside Nigeria, and Nigerian neighbors, the Cameroon and others. So these are some of the problems that the Nigerian Navy is facing in the Gulf. Then we also had the problem of support from the whole of Gulf of Guinea region, the support of other regions and their navies. So one of the problems they also face, which they have tried to make sure they increase their collaboration with other maritime stakeholders and other countries. And the Nigerian Navy cannot fully succeed. We know they cannot fully succeed without keeping the Gulf of the safe outside the other collaboration with other member countries. And this is one of the things that they have been able to do, and try by all means to collaborate with other navies from member countries and outside member countries to see how they can be able to manage the problem in the Gulf. And some of the ways they've been able to do that was to collaborate with the government. One of the ones they did, the key outcome of this interaction is the promulgation of the Harmonized Standard Operating Procedure. That's the HASOP on the arrest and detention of vessels and persons in Nigeria's maritime environment. And they have also been able to partner with America to engage in the annual sea exercise codenamed Urban Game. The Urban Game has been going on for quite some time, I think from 2010 or so. So the aims of Urban Game is to improve maritime domain awareness, information sharing, and enhance the collective abilities of Gulf of Guinea and West African nations to counter illegality in the maritime domain. That has been going on for some time now, and they've been able to succeed in doing that. We also see the Nigerian Navy active participation in bilateral and multilateral efforts that they have helped to enhance collective security. This has led to the establishment of mechanisms for sharing maritime information with regional navies and maritime regulatory agencies at the Maritime Trade Information Sharing Center in Ghana. Recently, so we see Nigerian Navy in collaboration with the Ghanaian Gulf of Guinea safe. Also, the establishment of a National Maritime Center in Benin Republic in ECOWAS Zone E, but under the lead of the Nigerian Navy. Now, Nigerian Navy, we know, is the strongest navy in the region because Nigeria's nature, Nigeria being like the big brother of other regions in Africa, the whole of that region expect that Nigerian Navy will work harder than the other navies. And you see that Nigerian Navy has collaborated with so many other countries to see that the Gulf of Guinea is safe for trade and for movement. Other efforts made by the Nigerian Navy to tackle maritime crime in the Gulf of Guinea include the conduct of a biennial international maritime conference and regional sea exercise Kwaghe, held in 2018, involving over 17 ships and aircraft from 7 different countries, including the Chinese PLA Navy ship Yancheng, to further consolidate inter-regional multilateral efforts as securing the Gulf of Guinea. You also have the ex-NIMO organized by the French Navy in collaboration with the Nigerian Navy. The government of Nigeria has also tried to see how they help the Nigerian Navy to make progress. And 2 of the Navy's OV, NNS Centenary and NNS Unity, were built by the Chinese shipbuilders. The Chinese government also graciously donated a fast road NNS Sama to the Nigerian government. Now, we see some of these things have been done, but we can see that still Nigerian Navy is still having some challenges as it relates to piracy and illegal refineries. Then the insurgency of the things that has been a problem, because some of the insurgencies that is seen in Nigeria and the Delta region, where you have a lot of problems where you have illegal refineries, that has been a challenge to the Nigerian Navy. And Nigerian Navy has been working very hard. Last week, they were able to destroy about 44 illegal refineries, which is part of their duty. This is part of their duty as the Nigerian Navy. And the Nigerian Navy also, because of the enormous trust that other nations have on them, in the nations that made up that region. They believe that Nigerian Navy should work harder than it's working now to see that the Gulf of Guinea is and for movement. And even though eliminated, that is a maritime crime, has done quite a lot in curtailing the maritime crime in the Gulf of Guinea, but a lot more has to be done if Gulf of Guinea will be safe, or will be safe, rather, yes, I would say safe for movement and trade, because like I said, it is the area where Nigeria or the regions that are involved is interested in, but even nations outside Nigeria, they are also interested in the Gulf of Guinea. And the Gulf of Guinea is very, very important because of the strategic nature of the Gulf of Guinea. So the Nigerian Navy, they are mainly the Navy that, if you look the area that they are supposed to cover, you realize that the Nigerian Navy cover more, because for the meet with the other nations, area of cover is even beyond Nigeria's waterways. So very, very important that the Nigerian Navy work in collaboration with other navies of the regions that are involved in the Gulf of Guinea. That is one of the ways, or harness the problem of the piracy in the Gulf of Guinea. Thank you.
Great, excuse me. Thank you very much, Zara. That was a fantastic overview. And we haven't been able to reconnect Lawrence, who is in Kaduna. So we'll hopefully be able to get him back. But this is a good segue. It's a good introduction that Dirk can now speak to in terms of some of the specific contemporary mechanisms that the Nigerian Navy is using, including cooperation with private military companies to do their work.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. And I guess you can see the slides.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, as Chris mentioned, I'll be speaking very briefly about the cooperation between the Nigerian Navy and private companies. And I'll do that in 3 short parts. So I'll go into the history a little bit and a little bit about the background. Then that obviously cooperation between security forces and the private sector always has some issues, legal, operational issues. So this is quite interesting. I do work for a company that works a lot with shipping companies, with insurance companies, etc. So we talk to these companies, and they are operating with these privately operated vessels on a day-to-day basis. So there are some operational issues which are also very important and interesting. And then a brief summary. So just a very quick summary of the background, and there's a lot more to talk about, but in a nutshell, going back 10, 15 years from today, there was an insurgency in the Niger Delta, and I mean, conditions are still very complicated there. But during the days of the MEND insurgency, the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta, there were a lot of attacks against the oil and gas industry, because that was a good way to put pressure on the Nigerian government by various insurgent groups. And as I said, there's a lot more background to talk about there. But what happened in the years between roughly 2006, 7, 8, it was starting to get to the point where oil majors, international oil majors in Nigeria, felt that they had to move offshore. So they had a lot of operations onshore. Those were very often attacked. Oil workers were very often attacked, but there was a move towards offshore fields. And especially the international oil majors worked offshore because it was perceived to be a much more secure and stable environment, because of course you are very far away from the coastline. But then a couple of these offshore fields, offshore installations were attacked, and the biggest of these attacks took place in 2008, and you can see that here. That was the Bonga FPSO in the Bonga field. That's about 60 or 65 nautical miles from the coastline, and that represents about 10% of Nigerian daily oil production. So that was quite a significant incident, and that was offline, that vessel or that oil field was offline for about 10 days or 14 days or something like that. So that represented quite a lot of money. So in the context of the increasing number of attacks against these offshore fields, the Nigerian Navy had to make sure that there was better protection, similar to the Nigerian Army protecting various oil installations on land, or the Joint Task Force later. The problem was that the Nigerian Navy, and that's true until this day, basically, they have long suffered from a lack of funding. The funding that was available was mainly for recurrent expenses, less so for buying new vessels. And in general, there was a lack of operational assets at the time, a lack of small patrol boats that could actually go to sea and stay at sea for significant periods of time. So they didn't have a lot of patrol boats that could actually provide security around those offshore fields, but they did have a lot of personnel, and enough personnel, in fact. So over time, what developed was kind of a public-private partnership, because there were a lot of companies involved in the offshore sector in Nigeria, providing services to the offshore industry, like resupplies, specialized vessels for the offshore industry, essentially. And a lot of these companies now also provided some vessels which were partly crewed by that private company. So they provided the master, chief engineer, and one or two other crew members. And the rest of the crew was then provided by the Nigerian Navy. So naval personnel went on board, and these vessels were then used as dedicated security vessels to essentially circle around the offshore fields and to provide security. And this is something that is done until today. Now, that's the background to it. But how has that developed over the past couple of years? So basically, how that is being done is that this model is now operated under what's called a memorandum of understanding. And this memorandum of understanding is signed between the Nigerian Navy and different private companies that are, generally speaking, not necessarily security companies. They are offshore service providers. They're not genuine security companies. Some of them are, but the majority are not. But they provide these vessels, which are then used as security vessels. This memorandum of understanding has been issued on a couple of occasions over the past couple of years, and has been updated from time to time. And the most recent version was issued in 2021, and it was issued to 57 companies, which is a significant increase, as you can see here, from 30 companies which had signed the 2019 version. And it was originally planned that the number would go down, but it didn't, and there are various reasons for that. However, there are a couple of, this is a 10 or 12 page document, and there's quite a lot of specifications that these MOU holders have to fulfill, but very few of these MOU holders who have actually signed this document fulfill all requirements. So this comes down to enforcing these things, and that's unfortunately a bit of a problem. And we are doing due diligence. The company I work for, we're doing due diligence on a lot of these companies that have signed the memorandum of understanding, and that is a major concern. Now, this is an example of what these security vessels, security escort vessels, as they're dubbed, can look like. And for all means and purposes, this looks very much like a naval vessel. But this is something that was, in this case, built in South Africa, imported to Nigeria a couple, just last year, actually, a couple months ago. And this was during a sea trial. So the only thing that this one is missing compared to an actual naval vessel is there's no weapons on board, because this is a privately operated vessel. So the weapons and ammunition are provided by the Nigerian Navy together with the personnel. But otherwise, this is just a security vessel, which could also be run by pretty much any navy in Africa or anywhere else for that matter. What's interesting, though, is that all these MOU holders are operating a range of roughly 150 vessels that are used for these security purposes. And the problem is that not all of these are dedicated security vessels. And the pictures that you can see here, those are all my own pictures, which I took during various the due diligence visits to Nigeria, Lagos, and Port Harcourt, mostly, to do office audits on some of these security companies. So there's a broad range of pretty different vessels. So you get these dedicated security vessels, which are fairly new, which are very, very capable. You get former law enforcement vessels, so they're kind of used vessels that were used by coast guards, by customs, patrol boats that were used for these purposes. So they are generally fit for purpose. And you get some offshore supply vessels, which you can see on the bottom. So you get like old tugs, old crew boats, which are definitely not meant to be used in a security vessel role. So that is a bit of a problem, and that is very much an operational issue for shipping companies or for oil majors that are actually contracting them. When you look at the money that is generated, so as an oil company looking to provide security around an offshore field, or as a shipping company looking to contract one of these escort vessels or one of these security vessels to escort your ship from somewhere out at sea to a Nigerian port or to a Nigerian terminal, you have to spend quite a bit of money, and you have to pay a day rate which differs depending on what type of vessel you're contracting and how many days you're contracting them, etc., etc. So that money goes to that private company which has signed the MOU with the Nigerian Navy. So the Nigerian Navy doesn't benefit directly from it. So the financial side is that this money generated is going to the private company. And broadly speaking, and it's very hard to find any sort of reliable figures on that, but what you can calculate based on the number of vessels that are being used and the number of days they are employed and the number of companies, etc. There's a rough estimate, plus minus, I would say 10 or 20%, but this rough estimate, this brings in $280 million per year across all of these 57 companies which have signed a memorandum of understanding. Now that money is generated by them, but it's of course incredibly expensive to run these ships. You have to pay for financing these vessels, you have to pay for crews, for supplies, for maintenance, for fuel, etc., etc. So the actual money that is left in the respective companies is somewhere between 5 and 10%. But it's still quite good money to be made in this context. So that's quite interesting. And the vast majority of that money still comes from providing security around offshore oil and gas fields. And about 15%, as you can see here, that money is generated from shipping companies looking for escort vessels to go to ports or terminals in Nigeria. What happens when these vessels are on task? So on task means that the naval personnel is actually on board. So if there's no naval personnel, they're not on task, they're not used in a security role. And in that case, there's no weapons on board. So what happens if they are on task is that the Nigerian Navy sends personnel, generally a detachment of 7 people, including an officer in charge, and they come with suitable weapons and suitable ammunition. The problem for a shipping company or for an oil major is that they cannot verify the training or the equipment of the personnel that comes on board. So the Nigerian Navy says, those people that we send, they are well trained, they are well equipped, so everything's perfect, but there's no way to actually verify that. So that is a problem from a due diligence point of view. It's also a problem, or that has been more of a problem in the past, that there was a lack of suitable weapons that can actually be used as deck-mounted weapons on these vessels. And from a company point of view, is that the operational procedures between different MOU holders are quite different. So that comes down to how do you communicate with those security vessels, where do they rendezvous with ships at sea, etc., etc. So that is a bit of a problem. What's also a problem, especially for shipping companies to understand, is they've been used to dealing with privately contracted armed guards, and they are operating under something that's called the rules for the use of force, which is quite different from rules of engagement, which are of course relevant for military personnel. And the rules of engagement are generally secret or considered as secret by the Nigerian Navy. So when the vessel is on task, when they're escorting a ship or when they're circling around an offshore field, it's under operational control. So the master is civilian, but it's under operational control by the officer in charge from the Navy detachment. So that's quite important to note. So just to wrap this up, a very quick summary. And as I said, there's much more to talk about in general. But in general, you have this MOU model, which has evolved over the past 10 years or so, but generally speaking, it has remained the same. So the actual MOUs have changed a bit over time, but the general model is likely to evolve further, but will remain in place. It was very useful in the beginning, and it's still very useful to address short-term challenges, simply because the number of vessels needed for security around offshore fields is quite significant, because there's, I don't know, 15 or 20 offshore fields that need that level of protection off Nigeria. So on top of that, you have vessels in maintenance, etc. So you need quite a significant number of vessels. And that would be a significant investment for the Navy. So it was very good to address these short-term challenges, to cooperate with the private sector. But of course, when it comes to longer-term capacity development, what's the incentive of the Navy to actually spend on that? So that is a question whether this is really a bitter pill in the longer term. And from a company point of view, from an oil major or shipping company point of view that are looking to contract these vessels and to pay these vessels to provide security, it's very complicated to do any due diligence, because you can only look at the respective companies, but you cannot look at naval personnel. As I said, naval personnel's training, equipment, etc., etc. Those things cannot be verified, and that makes it complicated to actually do any audits on these companies, and that in turn makes it complicated for especially the larger shipping companies, the larger oil majors, that are very much dependent on such due diligence audits to actually do anything about this. And yeah, that was a very quick rundown and brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Dirk. It's an interesting solution to a complicated problem. And maybe one of the questions that might come up after is that in fact, all that money flowing to private companies, is that in fact taking potential money away from investment in the Navy? And again, I know that's complicated, but that maybe is something we could discuss. So we did get Lawrence back from Kaduna, and so we're hoping that he can now give us some insights into the development of the Navy during that key period after independence, but during the Civil War. And hopefully we can, hopefully his link will maintain. So Lawrence, did you want to show any slides during that presentation, or are you just going to make some comments?
Well, since I don't have much time, let me just comment.
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Network disappointed me, but I think I'm back. So like Professor Stapleton said, nothing was done about Nigerian Navy during the colonial period. Development of the Nigerian Navy started during the Civil War. And despite that, the Navy was able to play a very significant role in the war. And one thing that happened was that before the war, there was joint military training between the Army and the Navy to enable them participate in the war, because the Civil War was the first experience in warfare the Navy had. So during the Civil War, the Navy was able to secure all the waterways and all the oil installations in Biafra. And that was why the Civil War ended in favor of Nigeria. It will just to know that the war was prosecuted by Nigeria without borrowing 1 naira from anywhere. That was because the Navy was able to secure all the oil installations in Biafra-controlled territories. And one thing that happened was this. For the Army, yes, the war started in July. But for the Navy, the war started as far back as in May, when economic blockade was imposed on Biafra. And it was the Navy that implemented the blockade. Without the Navy, the Biafrans would have been getting whatever they wanted from outside the world. But being that the Navy was very effective, they were able to secure all the solutions and deny Biafra from having access to the outside world. And the Navy played a very key role. And that was even why the war lasted for so long. And the Biafran Navy also participated in the war. However, before the war started, the Biafrans in the Navy cannibalized most of the Nigerian naval ships. And because of that, they didn't know that the Navy would be able to participate in the war. And the Boni landed to the Biafrans by surprise because they didn't know that the Navy would be able to mount amphibious operation, given the terrain of the whole area. Because of that, the Biafran Navy didn't care much to secure Boni. But when Boni was taken by surprise, the Biafrans said no. The Nigerians can't take Port Harcourt by surprise. And that was why, till date, the federal forces did not take Port Harcourt through the sea. It was through the land because the Biafran Navy was able to mine all the channels in that general area. So the Nigerian Navy couldn't use the sea to attack Port Harcourt. It was during the Civil War that the Nigerian Navy acquired most of the ships that was used during the Civil War. And the one encounter between Biafra and Nigerian Navy was in July, when they had a clash around Port Harcourt. And the two commanders were good friends. The Biafran commander was Lieutenant Commander Pascal Odo, and Nigerian commander was Lieutenant Commander Akin Adu. Two of them were friends in the Nigerian Navy, but when the war broke out, Odo joined Biafran Navy. And before then, he was on patrol in the eastern region with the ship called NS Nigeria. So when the war broke out, or when Biafra was declared this, rather, Biafran Navy inherited that particular ship. I don't know if they're hearing me. Hello?
Yes, yeah, we're hearing you well, loud and clear.
Okay. So Nigerian Navy, Biafra Navy inherited that NNS Nigeria. I renamed it NNS Biafra, NNS Ibadan. So when the war started, the Navy Armada, all the naval ships, NNS Ogoja, NNS Enugu, Benin, Kaduna, Biafra had only that NNS Ibadan that it inherited from Nigeria. But unknown to Biafra, to Nigeria, there were other gunboats Biafra was able to manufacture during the Civil War, and they called them CPCs. They had CPC means coastal patrol craft. They had CPC 101, CPC 102, CPC 103. So with these CPCs, Biafrans kept on harassing the Nigerians. And one thing about the Civil War or about the Navy is this. People thought that after NNS Ibadan was destroyed by a Nigerian Navy, that the Biafran Navy ceased to exist. It's not true. There were several gunboats Biafra manufactured, and most of the rivers they operated, Nigerian Navy considered uncharted, and because of that, they didn't participate in the wars in those areas. So, in summary, the Navy played a very good role in the Civil War, and because they were able to secure all the oil installations, and they were able to deny Biafra from having access to the international community, that was why the war ended in favor of Nigeria. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it's hard to, I know you have done so much research on this and I've reviewed your slides, and that's a cogent summary. And it'd be interesting to see how much the operational requirements of the Nigerian Navy during the war sort of overcomes or reshapes some of those initial issues that Tim was pointing out about the formation of the formation of the Navy as a symbol. But now you actually have to do things. You have to do amphibious operations, and you have to do patrolling of river areas. And you even pointed out that in some cases, they wouldn't go in some of these delta areas because they were uncharted, and the Biafran Navy actually was seen to have control of the seas in those zones. So some interesting insights. There could be a whole book. I mean, there is some work done by Nigerian scholars and ex-officers on the Nigerian Navy, but I think this is a really interesting, and a lot of it's new thinking about putting naval development as an institution into context. Something that, again, the African Navy's research network is trying to do. So I really appreciate everybody participating, and thank you, Lawrence, for getting back on. I know sometimes the internet connections in Nigeria can be not as reliable as we'd like. So we do have a question from the audience, and I think that I would probably ask first Dirk to maybe deal with this question, if Dirk can see it. And please, other people, if you have any comments or questions, yeah, this is for Dirk, that's what I thought. So if you have any comments or questions, please post those. And Dirk, if you can see that question, please have a go.
Yeah, I'm just reading as we speak. So the Nigerian, NIMASA, the Nigerian Maritime Administration, well, first of all, that's a bit complicated. So there are two agencies in Nigeria that are responsible for maritime security. One is the Nigerian Navy, of course, and the other one is the Nigerian Maritime Administration, NIMASA. And there's been institutional rivalries between those two because of the not very clearly defined roles in terms of maritime security in Nigeria. So that has been addressed to an extent over the past couple of years, and cooperation has become a lot better. Now, NIMASA has acquired a lot of new, not only vessels, but also aerial surveillance assets, so helicopters, drones, maritime patrol aircraft, and that was under a project called the Deep Blue program, and it was operationalized or launched, officially launched in June last year. And under this program, they are looking to provide better law enforcement, better surveillance across the entire exclusive economic zone of Nigeria. That's basically the background to this story. So the NIMASA has a Maritime Guard Command, which is a cooperation between NIMASA and the Nigerian Navy. And those newly acquired assets, where does it stand in context of NIMASA and the Nigerian Navy? So yeah, that's quite complicated to answer and quite hard to answer because that is in the process of being sorted out. I would say it's not going to be a replacement for the memorandum of understanding, that's for sure, because they don't have that. There's still not enough capacities. They wouldn't have enough vessels to actually conduct security operations around these offshore fields, to circle around these offshore fields. Plus, those vessels would be just in one place. One thing that's interesting about this, though, is that the Nigerian Navy in the past has been accused of, if vessels have been acquired, a lot of the money that is in the budget for the Nigerian Navy is for recurrent expenses, as I mentioned. So if vessels have been acquired, a lot of the time there wasn't enough money for recurrent expenses, and those vessels were alongside most of the time. They weren't actually operated, they weren't actually at sea. NIMASA is different because NIMASA is a self-funding organization. So they actually contribute to the federal budget in Nigeria. So they have to come up with the money to operate all these assets from their own budget, and they are not reliant on the federal budget. So they are not as reliant on the federal budget as the Nigerian Navy would be. So that's quite interesting. But other than that, I would like to answer that question in about half a year or a year's time, because then I think a lot more is sorted out about these assets.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Dirk. There is, NIMASA is often seen as having some of the newest kit over the last couple of years, and it's interesting how that sort of division of labor is actually going to affect the operational environment. We do have an excellent question from James Barnett, And I'm just not sure if anybody in the audience and our panel has that particular expertise to answer the question, which is about the role of the Navy in basically peace support operations, but particularly ECOMOG. I would just point out that last time I was when I was doing research at in and around Unilag and Ibadan, I did pick up this excellent book published in 2007 called, in Nigeria, Peace Support Operations Command and Professionalism. And it just so happens that in chapter 6, there's a chapter by Navy Captain Akintola, the Nigerian Navy and Peace Support Operations since 1960, with a huge focus on ECOMOG. So there has been work on the issue of the Nigerian Navy's support for these kinds of missions. But is there anybody on our panel that wants to briefly address that question of the Navy's role in ECOMOG? So Zara or Lawrence, in terms of your direct experience and research, or anybody else?
Okay, thank you, Prof. Currently, I'm supervising a master's thesis that has to do with the role of the Navy in peace support operation, especially in Liberia and Sierra Leone. The Nigerian Navy has actually participated, especially in peace support operation in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And in Sierra Leone, for instance, it was the Navy that saved the situation, because there was a particular time the Army was facing a lot of challenges. It was Navy that supplied them with whatever they needed. And the role of the Navy in peace support operation in Liberia and Sierra Leone are being addressed by scholars. And one of the roles they played was in the area of transportation, because ECOMOG moved in, that is not their country. And the first point of starting is the high sea. And the high sea is the domain of the Navy. It was the Navy that gave them a covering fire before they were able to secure a lot of bases to start land operation. So the Navy actually participated in peace support operation, especially in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And currently, like I said, we are working on a master's thesis that will discuss some of these challenges. Thank you.
May I say something, Prof?
Yes, please go ahead, Zara.
Okay. I will start with the difference between NIMASA and the Navy, Someone said, I think maybe the difference between the two of them. Yes, NIMASA is responsible for regulations related to Nigerian shipping, maritime labor, and coastal waters. While the Navy's responsibility is to make sure that the waterways, Nigerian waterways, that they are safe for movement, for trade, and also combating the fact that any external aggression, like Udeagbala rightly pointed out. So you find out that the Navy works more their main aim is to make sure that the country is safe, the waterways are safe, and then to ward off every attack that comes from outside to attack our country, Nigeria. Now, not only Nigeria, to all.
I think we've lost, I can't hear Zara at the moment. So, will we get her back? She's pointing out really interesting, the differences between NIMASA and the Nigerian Navy, which of course supposed to have very specific institutional responsibilities. But sometimes, of course, doesn't matter what country it is, those institutional responsibilities might overlap, and it's not as clear cut as it might otherwise seem. There was a good question, Tim. If you saw the question from Ozina, like to know more about the specific roles played by the Nigerian Marine Service in the conquest of the Nigerian area. Now, I know that could be another chapter in a book, but if you could maybe give some highlights from the research you've done, both on this project, but also your longstanding role, your longstanding research in the history of conquest.
So thanks to my old friend Ozina for the question. And I actually have a quotation here about a particular vessel that's interesting, that might answer it to an extent. So back in 1894, when the first Marine Department was created in the Southeast, there was a vessel, its sort of main vessel at the time, 1894, was called the Beecroft. Of course, it's a famous name in Nigerian history. And it was a 100-foot stern wheeler, and it had a 3-pound cannon and 2 machine guns. And that was kind of the biggest, most impressive vessel they had back in those days. And according to a report written by a colonial official, quote, "The Beecroft has rendered most excellent service in reducing to subjugation, to a very great extent by her mere presence, the somewhat unruly tribes of the Cross River." So that kind of tells you something about what the Beecroft was doing, applying those waterways around there. But to be more specific, almost every colonial military operation in southeastern Nigeria in the 1890s and early 1900s involved the Marine Department to some extent, greater or lesser extent. And that includes the very big famous expeditions of conquest, like when the Benin Kingdom was conquered in 1897, and then the Arrow Expedition, 1901. But it also, you know, gets into the dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of other much less known military operations where these vessels transported troops along the waterways, of course, logistically, you know, delivering supplies and so on, and also fire support platforms. So without those vessels, that part of Nigeria would have never been conquered, would have never been incorporated into a colonial state. So that's my short answer.
That's great, Tim. We're approaching what we would think would be our time limit. I know we started a little bit late. We just had a couple of technical issues at the very beginning. I don't see any additional questions, just double checking to make sure I haven't missed any. No. So what I would say was I'd like to, first of all, thank all of our,
Caesar raised his hand, Chris.
Sorry, somebody who raised his hand?
Caesar.
Caesar, okay, Caesar, go ahead. Let me just see if I can allow to talk. There you go. Caesar, go ahead. Just have to make sure you unmute.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So I was trying to send this about because I also having technical problems here. So considering that the Gulf of Guinea is very important to the economic development and stability of the region, and considering that also the various navies along that stretch, my question is, and also considering the differences in the naval setup along this long coast, my question is, what is the nature of cooperation among the various countries in the region to make sure that the Gulf of Guinea remained safe in terms of operations?
It's an excellent question, and it can be at all sorts of different levels. So I'm curious then, who would like to address that question? Dirk, do you want to address that question somewhat, or Zara? All I would say is, in terms of even cooperation with navies in the Gulf of Guinea, here we are speaking, as we mentioned, we're in Canada, right? You can't get much farther away from the African coast as we are here in Calgary, but Canada has resumed which has become an annual training and cooperation visit of 2 of its rather small for an Atlantic voyage, but 2 of its coastal patrol vessels that are actually now heading over to West Africa. We don't know exactly which ports they're going to go into, but then they also take part, and usually they take part in Udeagbala Express. So even Canada is developing closer ties with African navies in the Gulf of Guinea and in West Africa. So that's an interesting form of, external cooperation in the region. There's all sorts of other navies, of course, the United States, all the other big navies. But it'd be really interesting if somebody could touch on some of the more specific elements of regional cooperation. And Dirk, I'll hand off to you first, and we'll see if anybody else wants to address the question.
Yeah, just very quickly. So this regional cooperation has improved quite a lot over the past couple of years. So there was a document called the Yaoundé Code of Conduct that was signed in 2013. And that really addresses regional cooperation, and it addresses all sorts of maritime security issues, or to work together on maritime security issues. And based on that, there's been a lot of work that has been done over the past couple of years that has come from a relatively low level in terms of both cooperation and also in terms of naval capabilities in various countries, essentially across the region. So most of these countries, they do not have a lot of naval vessels, they do not have a lot of surveillance capacities, etc., etc. So most of the time, any domestic authorities, they don't really know what is going on throughout the exclusive economic zone, and that is a major problem. So if you want to conduct any naval operations, any law enforcement operations, you have to know what's going on to begin with, and that is an issue. Having said that, over the past couple of years, there has been a lot of progress that has been made. There's been operational centers that have been put in place. There's one in Ghana, in Accra, which cooperates between Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and a couple of countries west of Cote d'Ivoire. There's also one in Cotonou in Benin Republic, which cooperates between Nigeria, Benin, and Togo. There's been a joint patrol, for example, for the first time last November between these three countries, Nigeria, Benin, and Togo. So all of these things are taking place. As I said, it comes from a very small level, but in terms of cooperation, I think it has increased significantly compared to the situation just 3 or 4 years ago. And that's very important, and that's a very good step. So, and that's to be improved even further.
Yeah, excellent. I'm trying to unravel some of that cooperation, some of my own work in one of my classes that we're teaching. I'm teaching this term on global governance in the maritime domain. So I have students working on some of these issues, and the level of at least institutional governance plus capabilities plus MDA centers, etc., has risen considerably over the last 10 years, and so. Particularly, I am particularly now interested in the extent of Navy cooperation as well, in terms of both training together, sharing information, doing exercises together, and that I think is a growing field of research, both in terms of policy, but also the academic research about where it's been and where it's going. Excellent. It wasn't a question, but. Mr. Mazumdar, on who I just know, people know, if you know anything about, if you follow defense news, you'll recognize the name, and we will hopefully have him on in a future webinar. We've already been under discussion, but really pointed out that the Nigerian Navy had amphibious warfare capabilities during that period of the ECOMOG interventions, but really has lost that capability for the last decade, but will get it back with some deliveries. It looks like 2 LS, landing ship tanks in 2022, regaining some of that lost amphibious capability that was missing for most of the 2010s. So capability provides policy options that you don't otherwise have, and so maybe that's something to look at in terms of future both peacekeeping, but also maybe more robust interventions in the future. So great, thank you for pointing that out.
I'll add that one of the things I couldn't cover in my presentation because of time was that one of the ships or vessels acquired in 1959 was a landing craft tank from Britain, which the Nigerian government bought for £10,000, which doesn't seem much now, but I think was more than that, and that was fairly cheap compared to what most vessels were going for. But they were thinking that that would be used to take police vehicles and so on in the hinterland, but they only had one of them, right? And so
was it still operational at the time of the Civil War? Was it still operational?
I think
by
so.
67?
It's called
Yeah.
Lakoja, I think, ultimately.
Okay.
So, but I mean, it was one, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So somebody was thinking about, you know, deploying security forces into the hinterland, but it was a low priority because much, much more money, I mean, hundreds of thousands of pounds back in '59 was spent on seaward defense boats, basically.
Right.
To fulfill that minesweeping, port protection, you know, and those are the vessels that Dr. Lawrence was talking about, and that blockaded Biafra, right? And except the one that ended up in the Biafra Navy, I guess.
Right, exactly. Well, we're about at our 90-minute mark from the point we started, even though it was, you know, we were a bit late. Last chance for anybody in terms of questions from the audience. Excellent. Last two bits for anybody to throw in at this point, any of our panelists, Zara, Lawrence, any last comments before we wrap this up? I think they've actually lost their connections. So, okay. Any last comments then, Dirk? Any last comments, Tim? Dirk, you're good? Thank you very much. I know there it's late, it's Friday, it's, what are you getting, pushing 8 o'clock, I think, your time. Here, we're just starting our day, so.
7. But yeah, no, thanks for the invitation and thanks for hosting this. So that was very interesting.
Well, it went pretty well. We know that sometimes there's problems with Nigerian connections, and we got both contributors on, which was fantastic. What I would say is we are always looking for new ideas for some of our webinars. We do have 2 or 3 ideas that are percolating and are in different different states of readiness. But one of the things we do want to work on is one of our next 1 or 2 Seapower African Seapower webinars is actually looking a little bit more historical and a little bit more theoretical, and we're trying to put together a panel on locating the African Mahan, which is it gives you a sense of what we're trying to do. Sea power in the African context historically, right? And one of the issues, of course, why there's limited focus on sea power, African sea powers, even though it's such a large continent, the continent has one of the shortest coastlines compared to any other continent because it's comparatively smooth compared to, for instance, Europe or even South America, et cetera, et cetera. So that limits the extent of outward facing, sea facing. But we know right from, if you think about the Mediterranean, you think about the Carthaginians and the Punic Wars, and you think about the large fleets, which apparently set sail from West Africa, funded by basically, you know, the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, going west, potentially. The East Coast, long history of seafaring city-states, nations, etc. So that's going to be one of our upcoming ideas that we're going to pursue and draw people in, historians, naval theorists, to think about finding the African Mahan. So that'll be an upcoming webinar. Tim, any final words? Nope. Okay, great. Well, again, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for our attendees. Thank you very much for our panelists for participating despite the bizarre time differences between Western Canada, West Africa, and Central Europe, or Western Europe. And we really appreciate everybody attending, and we will post this webinar on our website at africannavies.net in the very near future. So please join the network, become sort of a regular contributor, get more information about what people are doing, make links so that we can expand. We know that there's a lot of work done in the maritime domain and maritime security, but we really want to increase the focus on analysis of the navies as institutions, both historically, but also in terms of contemporary orientations and capabilities. So So again, thank you very much, everybody, and have a very good day and a good weekend.